Cool. Hey everyone, welcome to the Stampede chats. It's Dorph here, course director. With Marewa Sutherland. She's the dietitian from Pure Sports Nutrition, our food nutrition and hydration partner for all of our events at Single Track. They came on board last year for the GPT 100, and they supply all of our aid station like electrolyte drink, as well as a really cool thing. They actually have gels at the aid stations as well. So all of our Stampede aid stations this year will have 4 gel flavors. We have the fluid gels like that. So we'll have lemon, cola, raspberry, and mango. How you going, Maria? Are you feeling good?
Yeah, I am feeling good. 9:30 p.m. over here, so a few
No,
coffees in the
straight.
afternoon.
Yeah, nice. I did have a coffee this afternoon as well. Stay awake. So you're in Christchurch at the moment, and is that where Pure all started? Tell me a little bit about the backstory.
Yeah, Pure is Christchurch born and bred. I literally started it here 11 years ago in my brother's garage with my brother and I. So at the time we were doing heaps and heaps of racing, cycling, and we both had backgrounds in endurance sort of sport. And I guess for New Zealand back then, there was a massive gap for supplements that actually kind of tasted half decent. So that was the ethos behind it. We're like, hey, we've got to be able to do something better. I'm a sports nutritionist. I'd just come fresh out of university with that background. So we just basically spent a year researching the hell out of what should be in a supplement. And long story short, most of the stuff on the market was either the cheapest ingredients with massive profit margins or kind of like too scientific. So it had all the science, but it actually tasted terrible. So the science didn't really work because it wasn't that practical to have. So we sort of found a little gap. We fell into the pure sort of side of things because the real fruit had the best flavoring and the sort of natural ingredients tasted better, had the better science. So we fell into that market, and that's sort of an area we've really tried hard to match is that science and the natural side of it. So yeah, fast forward 11 years, we manufacture it all ourselves here in Christchurch. I think we have about 16 staff. So we're still, in the scheme of sports nutrition, not massive, but yeah, it's growing nicely. So
Yeah, it definitely came on my radar pretty heavily last year, and I take my sports nutrition pretty serious. So, yeah, super good products. I've been using them for 6 months ish now, and absolutely love them. So, let's get into we can talk more about the race day stuff, like the gels I was mentioning earlier later. We'll
yeah.
try and go through a bit of almost like through the racing whole process. We'll start with just your everyday kind of nutrition tips, and then how to fuel, especially for training, and then we'll talk about that a few days, sort of breakfast of the race, kind of eating and drinking, and then yeah, then we'll get into the meat of it, which will be that race day sort of nutrition plan, and then also how to recover post event. So yeah, we'll start with this the everyday life. Like when you're trying to put in those miles and you're starting to ramp it up a little bit, sort of really come into that end of that sort of period now, but just to support good training and give us a gauge on how to eat and how to gauge how much to eat and what to eat throughout daily life, and when you're starting to get into the more serious training.
Yeah, cool. I think this is probably, I would say, the most important area of nutrition for runners and particularly those ultra running distances because what you do every day in your training is going to be the most valuable to what you can get out of a race. And as we all know, these races take so much out of us, particularly the longer distances, that our training nutrition is just so heavily, it's so, so important. You probably won't be amazed to hear like it is the basics that get the performance. So it's our fruits, our vegetables, having a diet that is really natural. It's not full of processed packaged foods. It's so hard when you talk to athletes because when you're putting in the Ks and doing that high intensity exercise and you're burning that much fuel each day, it is so easy for athletes to literally eat whatever they want because they can. They're burning the energy. They can justify it. They're probably not putting on weight if they're eating the crap. And it is a little bit of a funny area. Like there's a time and a place for those junk type foods for athletes. But I definitely think your base training needs to really revolve around those fruits and veggies, those beautiful complex carbs like your brown rices, your brown pastas, your high carbohydrates, and then that's really going to give you a base to that training. I think in terms of quantities of what you need, it really depends on where you're at in your training phase. Obviously, race day is quite close to us now, so um, people will probably be having quite heavy loads, but then maybe they'll be tailing off a little bit. So I think it's just important to sort of get to know your body, go with your hunger cues when you're hungry, when you're not hungry. Timing around training is massive. So protein's obviously a super important nutrient for recovery. So it's having that spread throughout the day is just so, so important. And I know athletes need high protein.
People say after the run is super important. How important is that? Like, how people say like the classic chocolate milk thing, which I think was probably just
Yeah.
a science experiment or something. But like, how important is that to get, right after the run as opposed to throughout the day, or does it not matter so much?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we used to be really focused on that half an hour, the golden window after training to get our protein, our carbs, and things in. And I think as we've come along, we've realized that while that is important, it's actually important to spread your protein out over the day so you get that continuous recovery. So not just that straight away, but have it. It's probably more important to make sure you're just having it at every meal throughout the day. And chocolate milk is actually epic because it's got a high amount of carbs and protein. So
Yeah, I know it's good, but I think somebody mentioned like it was funded chocolate milk company or something, which it might have been. I'm sure it's like also very good for you. Yeah, I always try and get in because you guys have your protein powders as well. Always try and get in a protein shake. You can have that with milk, I think, or it doesn't really
yeah,
matter. Water. And then yeah, like a banana or something or some sort of
yeah,
carbohydrate at the same time. But yeah, I think that the main meals are still the most important thing and
yeah,
eat a lot. Just kind of if you're training high mileage and it's all going well training wise, I think it's just good to eat a lot always, really. And um,
yeah.
you can't really overdo it. But if it really depends on your training and the stage you're at.
Yeah.
In the
And I
tape,
think also that recovery, if you don't get that recovery in straight away, people sort of blow out later, like they just get so tired later and just go crazy on whatever they can find. So if you're actually fueling properly during that training and then recovering straight after, that really opens you up to just recovering well and carrying on like normally rather than binging later in the day.
yeah, yeah, just being consistent.
Yeah.
Uh, what about hydration, sort of in everyday life? Is there any rules around that, or do you not really think about it, or how does that work?
I actually think hydration is like one of the most important aspects of sports nutrition all round, and I think it does start. Most people walk around dehydrated, and particularly athletes, and it all starts first thing in the morning, and everyone can get a gauge on where they're at by just looking at their pee. So, if your pee's light, it's great, you're hydrated. Obviously, the darker it is, the more dehydrated you are. Depending also if you take supplements that can impact what your pee looks like. So remembering that if you've gone hard on the vitamin C or whatever, it's obviously going to be a different color. But that is such a good gauge in the morning and then throughout the day of where you're actually standing in hydration. And I do think athletes can be useless at hydrating. So with water throughout the day. So you need upwards of 2 liters per day. That's not including what you have when you're sweating, if you live in a hot climate. So that is a key thing because as you dehydrate, as we all know, performance decreases when we're racing. So it's important to stay on top of that during training and just every day. One little thing I will say is training sessions are such a great time to work out how much hydration you actually need when you're training and racing. And what you can do is weigh yourself before and after. I'm not an advocate for weighing yourself much in life. Like, I don't think it's that necessary. But if you weigh yourself before and after like a long session and you've lost a kg, then you need to drink 1.5 liters. So 1.5 times what you lose, you need to replace that after your session.
And there's that, do you have to factor in the time there as well? Like, is that for an hour run or
It doesn't matter what the time is, it's just before and after. Because obviously, if you're drinking during the session, it's possible you won't lose weight because you're replacing all the fluids you've lost as you go. But it's a really good gauge because if you're finishing the session a kg lighter, you're obviously dehydrating, which can affect your performance. And during race day, that is such a small area to make such massive gains.
I see. I was thinking you don't drink at all through the session, but you can drink. It's just if you end
Yeah,
up, it's 1.5.
yeah.
Yeah, I see.
So it's a great way to see if you're drinking enough, like in your long sessions, because if you're coming back really like lower in weight, you're not obviously not hydrating enough. So you're not, you're dehydrating, which causes fatigue. It's how you spiral essentially into fatigue. So it's a great way to figure out like, oh, I'm not meeting my hourly aims because no one knows how much they need per hour. There's no blanket
Yeah,
rule, is there?
yeah, yeah. It's always drink to thirst is the main advice, and yeah,
Yeah.
people are under drinking a lot of time, but then train. I mean, am I
Oh,
back?
can you hear me now? Yep, you're back. Sorry, that last question, you froze for me.
Oh, thank heavens I'm back because Zoom actually totally shut down and then came back up again. So no, I'm back. Cool. Meeting is still streaming. That's good. Yeah, I was gonna ask. So in everyday training, I mean everyday life, do you think about electrolytes, or is that more for during running and during racing?
Yeah, I definitely think you do because electrolytes help you hydrate more efficiently. So when we drink, sometimes you can sort of feel like it goes straight through you. So those electrolytes help you replace the sweat you actually lose. They help replace the electrolytes, but also they help pull that fluid into your body.
Right.
So I think it is important. Again, it's quite personal. Some people sweat a lot, some people don't. Some people have high concentration in sweat, some people don't. So
And you can kind of tell a little bit from some people have salty marks on this, like, their clothes after a run, or their hat has always got salty mark. Me, for example,
yeah,
I quite sweaty, but I don't ever have any traces of salt anywhere. But
yeah.
even most people will have salt, on their face or on their arm, like somewhere, and you can feel it. And then sort of how salty or sweaty you are. For me, I can never feel salt anywhere. So I
Yeah.
know that I'm not a salty sweater. And that's
Do you
one.
suffer from cramp like during racing or not really?
Nah, not really. Very rarely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that a good way to
Yeah.
tell whether you need more or?
Yeah, I think so. Like obviously cramps a lot of different things like high intensity or not being like the training level not being where it needs to be. But I think yeah, it's a great way to gauge if you've got enough salt. Oh, you are still there. Sorry, you froze for a second. And also the amazing thing about electrolytes is you can load on them pre-race. So you can in the days up to a race.
Let's touch on that in a second, actually. I think that's a good point. So
Cool.
we'll talk about like the sort of lead into the race and maybe like three to the night before, 3 days out to like the night before. How does your nutrition change much at all in those lead up days, or is it just trying to keep the things similar?
Yeah, I totally think it depends on the distance you're running, but the longer you're running, obviously the longer the lead in needs to be for your carbohydrate loading, which essentially is stocking up the glycogen stores in your body with carbohydrates so that when it comes to race day, essentially you've got more fuel in the tank. So our body's really limited. Like we can store as much fat as we want, basically. We'll just keep storing it, but carbohydrate, we don't have enough for longer than like a couple of hours of exercise. So that's where we can really maximize those days before and loading that up. And what I would say is males and females are quite different with what they need. So males, it's up to about 10 grams of carbohydrate per kg per day. And females, it's like closer to 8. So it's actually a lower amount. Um,
So that's cool that there's an actual equation for it. So yeah, I would that's a fair bit of carbohydrate, isn't it? It's like 800.
yeah.
For me, it'd be like like over 800 grams of carbs or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite a lot. And what I would recommend is like, say you're doing I don't know, like if you're running like 100 kilometers, you probably want to do like a 4-day carbohydrate load.
Whatever.
Whereas if you're just doing a half marathon, maybe 2 days is plenty.
Yeah.
But in those 4 days leading in, the first day might just be making sure you're including carbs in your snacks
Yeah.
and just
Mm.
making sure you're loading on those. And they might be quite natural versions. And then as you get closer to the race, you want to just make sure you're getting in like sports drink can
Yeah.
be a great carbohydrate loader. You know,
Mm.
drinking your carbs. You just want to make it so I guess you're getting to the start line and you want to feel like not light, but ready to go rather than like
Yeah, I've heard one pretty good runner on a podcast recently say like he just sips like energy drink like the 2 days
yeah,
before the race. Like he'll eat normally, everything will be
yeah,
normal, won't change his diet, but he'll
yeah,
just add in just basically, yeah, drinking energy drink. Not like
yeah,
I'm not talking like caffeinated energy drinks, like yeah, literally
yeah,
like a sports sugary drink.
yeah,
Um, which is sounds just horrible for you. But I mean, it's interesting, like just how much it works. I think every runner that does it sees big gains in that. And yeah,
yeah.
it's just store those glycogen stores right up, and you'll be buzzing on race day. And I've actually never tried that. I only heard of that recently, so I think next race I do, I'll have to consider the old like just drinking. Maybe would something even like the race fuel work for that? I've got the race fuel here. Or is that like just like
Yeah.
race day
No,
stuff?
yeah, technically it would because it's got 90 grams of carbs per serving.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. You could,
super high in electrolytes though. So I don't know if you'd want that many electrolytes
oh,
in
okay.
the, but it actually would be perfect for not being glug. Like you could literally have one serve of that and yeah,
Yeah,
what, like if you weigh 80 kgs, it's like
it's a 10.
it's
Yeah,
over it. Yeah, yeah. So I can see why they would do that because it's the easiest way rather than getting weighed down with all the food you have to process.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Mm.
yeah.
I
But it
think
would
it's
also
common.
be interesting if people actually have a wee look at their equation and see if they are meeting what they're meant to, because I guess sometimes you don't know. Yeah.
Hey, I think the safest rule would be just to have a bump up a little bit more carbs in the couple days before, and you can't really go wrong.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
people maybe go overboard that night before the race or something, and probably can wake up a bit feeling a bit heavy and not right. Is
Yeah.
one thing I would recommend trying to avoid at least. So
100%.
the hydration, but not just the liquid, but also electrolyte in the day before the race. Because I have in the past just drunk heaps of water the day before a race, kind of just freaking out because that's what people do, and it didn't go well at all for me. So you were saying something about salt loading or
Yeah. So I guess there's a few reasons. So the sports drink with the electrolytes and the carbs, that helps hydrate you because those two things both pull the water into your body. So you're gonna retain the hydration rather than water might just sort of go right through you. And also you're gonna get your electrolyte stores up, which is awesome because if you're sweating for hours and hours, you're gonna be losing those electrolytes and more likely to fatigue and cramp and stuff like that. So it's just kind of ticking more boxes, doing that.
if you were going to do that, would you almost have to? drop back on the electrolyte throughout race day, or if it's a shorter race, just not even have it, or would you still have a little bit?
No, you shouldn't have to drop back because your body doesn't have the capacity to hold those stores. So theoretically, you should be fine in race day to keep going with what your race plan is.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. So in general, would you drink a little bit more the day before a race, but just not go overboard? Is that the sort of advice?
Um, I don't know the scientific amount, but like I probably like I would have I normally say would drink 2 liters. I'd probably go for 3 liters the day before a race. Just to make sure I'm starting that much more hydrated.
Yeah.
We also say sip away before race on hydration, like basically don't ever stop drinking. But I'm not as good as doing that because running, I don't like starting feeling a little bit fuller. But definitely the day before I, yeah, go for gold on it. So I think everyone's different.
Yeah, do you want to mention, I know that I haven't tried it, but I know you have a product which is like a beetroot powder. Would that be something that you take? I know a lot of people drink beetroot juice the day before a race. Is that something that you would recommend doing the day before a race, or how do you use that in general? A
Yeah,
lot of
yeah, so beet is insane. Like our beet powder, we actually get it's Australian grown and it's super concentrated. So like one packet, it's quite tiny, is the equivalent to 1.6 liters of concentrated beet juice and it's freeze dried. So I think people think, oh sweet, I'll just juice a beet and that will be great. But you actually need it in such high amounts to get the sports performance out of it. And the reason we turned it into a product is because there's really solid science behind beetroot to say that the nitrates in beet, they naturally occur in beet. When we consume them, our saliva actually turns it into something called nitric oxide, which opens up our blood vessels. And when you think about that in like an exercise capacity, that just means more blood to your muscles, which means more oxygen, it means more nutrients, it means clearing lactic acid. So it's kind of like free efficiency, which almost sounds too good to be true. But the reason we say we load on it before race day is because you can actually accumulate it in your body, in your blood. So you can start 5 days out loading on beet, and the normal regime is you have a certain amount every day in the days leading up to a race.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, and obviously beet can be quite like it's quite natural and earthy, and like I mean I'm like a little bit sensitive to it if I've got race nerves or something. So I'll load on it up to like the day before, and then that's it for me. Whereas some people take it literally race morning, 2 hours before. But it's incredible. I would say practice and training to make sure it works for you. Just like everything, you've got to practice and training. And then one thing I will say is that people say like, "Oh, why don't I use it for training every day then?" And there's like a theory on it that you want to stress your body in training,
Mhm.
so you're better to just save it for race day. And
Yeah,
yeah,
still
so
get the training effects, but you might not feel as good in training by not taking it. But you may as well save that
yeah,
for race day. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah. Yeah, and blackcurrant actually does a similar thing as well. So the science behind blackcurrant's epic as well, and that's a similar thing that you can have through training as well.
Yeah.
So if people want to look into blackcurrant, it's quite an amazing. Again, increases blood flow. They don't really know how it does it, but yeah.
Because you have a black currant something as well, don't you? Is
Yeah,
that
we brought out a powder for recovery because it clears lactic acid, and then the science has come through so thick and fast about performance that we've had to totally do like another product to help with performance. And yeah, so we do capsules for performance, but
yeah,
it's
cool.
just insane. Like black currant has more vitamin C than anything else, like other fruit or veggie.
Yeah.
So like one capsule has 30 black currants equivalent. So I guess it's just like this insane antioxidant hit. Yeah.
Well, getting some hacks here. This is good. I'll get online. Anyway, hey, welcome back. Sorry about we had some technical difficulties. We're re-recording a couple of days later to finish off our race plan. So let's focus just on the race plan in the next 10, 15 minutes. We'll talk about basically how to fuel for your 10K to 100K, anything from that hour to really 20 plus hour effort. What are the main sort of things that you think about when you're planning a race nutrition plan, and like the main variables that you want to consider, I guess?
Cool. Sounds good.
So yeah, like if we're thinking about, let's start with like is it best to talk about per hour? Like how much fluid,
Um,
how many carbs, how much salt to have per hour, or is it more, what do you
yeah,
recommend?
I guess what I would say is it goes back to training. And I know the race is, we're getting close to race day, but ideally you want to use your really long trainings to nut out what your race day nutrition looks like. And I think that's when you can get quite lofty with your goals. Like, um, the science is coming through really solidly now on these high carbohydrate aims we're able to get to each hour if we've got the right ingredients. So if you go back to that, you can aim for like maybe your 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And in terms of hydration, everyone is so different and they need to be really flexible with the day depending on the weather. Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cold? So that's where, again, if you can use your long trainings to figure out what you can actually tolerate per hour, then you can start putting together this like gold race plan that you can practice and train your body to work towards. Because there's no point in like following the science really specifically and then turning up to race day and trying to meet your goals because you'll never do it.
Mm.
So it's essentially using your training to work backwards. And it's so tricky in trail running and ultras, particularly because some people literally will do the same nutrition they do for 10 hours as they'll do for like 28 hours. So it really comes down to the personal, what works for you.
Yeah, my experience is most people have a plan, and 90% of the time they'll have to adapt that in the later stages of a race. And then for the odd few people, I know somebody who just sticks to like a beep on their watch, and they can do it for like 30 hours, and they've done it multiple times in a row now. And I think that's the dream. It's really hard to achieve. I've actually probably achieved it once. But yeah, it's hard to properly put together for multiple hours on end. So when you're constructing that sort of like hourly plan, would you say, I guess the easiest way you mentioned before would be to start with that fluid intake. So think about how much you're consuming on a long run, or record how much you consume on a long run, and then do that weigh yourself before and after, and you'll get, as long as the conditions are similar on race day, you'll get that idea of how much fluid to consume per hour. And maybe that's the cleanest way to start thinking about that race day plan. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think you can also break it down in terms of most people use, would you say hydro packs maybe, or the little bladder thing. So you can break it down between aid stations, and once you know your aims, you can actually set yourself quite strict guidelines to get through what you've got between each aid station, or maybe it will last two aid stations. I'm not sure. So it's really having the discipline to follow what you've practiced in your training on race day, because I think hydration is king in sports nutrition, because as soon as we start dehydrating, we start that fatigue cycle, and that can also impact like how we tolerate our nutrition. So how our gut takes on carbohydrates and foods and things like that. So if you can keep on top of that hydration, it's so helpful down the track and those 20 hours later. Whereas
Yeah.
if you're slowly dehydrating more and more and more, then obviously nutrition will have to change because you can't keep on board what you ideally would like to.
So say you've got that general goal, you've like weighed yourself, you might have even been overhydrating potentially. So like
Yeah.
you could even bring that down, and then you've got this goal hydration that you want to hit. I guess the next one would probably be electrolyte, because it relates so heavily to hydration, and then there's different ways of taking that in. Is there, if people didn't want to have to go
do the research, is there any actual milligram sort of guidelines you have that we can just say now for people, if they know they're a salty sweater, if they know they're a light sweater, like what are the kind of gauges, or is there a resource that they can go to for that sort of thing?
I don't think personally, I don't work as scientifically as milligrams. Like, I just know if you're not a salty sweater, then your sports drink should be adequate, more than adequate to cover that.
Yeah.
But you still need electrolytes because you still will be losing them. But then if you are a salty sweater, that's when you need to, or you can add in like your electrolyte capsules. You can salt load, we mentioned before the race. You can have the capsules every hour.
Yeah, I've got
We were,
capsules here as well. So in one
yeah,
of
so that's just
the
like,
capsules, there's like, yeah, I haven't got it, but in there's like a little tablet, and in one
yep,
of
yep,
them, I think there's 450 from memory.
yep.
So yeah,
So
like if you're taking one of them an hour,
yeah,
that's
440.
for most people.
Mm.
Um, but if you're a super salty sweater, and you
Yeah,
feel like you need more, then you could even probably have two of them an hour if you're only drinking
yeah,
water or something.
yeah. And that's where like we were going to talk about the race fuel, but the
Yeah.
like that sodium is 650 milligrams, which is 6 times higher than electrolyte hydration, which will be on the aid station. So
Yeah.
it's kind of just learning where your salt's coming from
Mm.
and what you need, what works for you.
So most people, if they're having that race fuel and relying on that, and they're managing to keep it going most of the race, that's for most people, that's going to almost be all that they need, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where it gets so complex because
Mhm.
we just had Tara Weir over here, like an ultra, and some athletes were doing 20. You can have one serve of this now, which is 90 grams of carbohydrate, really high in sodium. It's a type of carbohydrate called cluster dextrin, which is really absorbable and gentle on your stomach. So it's got a really neutral flavor profile. It's easy to get down. So the thing about it is, technically, you can have 90 grams an hour of carbs. So you could take one of these serves every hour for your complete ultra.
Yeah.
And some athletes can do that and absolutely rave about it, and they just didn't need to do anything else. Yet you get athletes that would like to eat. They get hungry. They get flavor fatigue. They want that as well. So those
Yeah.
athletes will benefit from the aid station provisions and also bringing their own real food.
Yeah.
Um,
Talking about carbs, I guess is the next major thing. Yeah, like a lot of people will have a sports drink, which would generally be probably most of them would only be about half of what you need per hour, say.
yeah.
And so on top of that, a lot of people add a gel every hour, and a lot of the times that's most of what you need.
Mhm.
What I would sort of think is more of a common between most ultra runners is they add in a real food, and that could be not even very often. That could be every 2 to 4 hours, or yeah, even if it's like every aid station, you don't carry food, but every aid station you have a bite of a
Yeah.
sandwich, or real food doesn't even have to be fully real food. It could be like a chocolate bar or a muesli bar,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Or like
sort
a
of,
Snickers.
yeah, pretty common, I think. And I think it's actually good practice to get some physical form of something in your stomach. I'd say every 4 hours is a good guide.
Mhm.
And then what I normally do is I carry like an emergency like muesli bar. So sometimes even if you've been getting in heaps of energy an hour through gels or whatever, you can still feel hungry in the belly, and so that's just an emergency. Like I'll have a bite of that, and that'll tie me over for a bit. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think in general, people are trying to eat more in ultras, and so yeah, you can probably bump up most people are probably under eating to what the new guidelines are. I'd say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think most athletes under fuel, like just as a, yeah, 100%. And I think it's a case of just training your body. And it's a really tricky one because I think in your long trainings, you probably don't want to be supplement heavy. Like you don't want to splash out on 50 gels every time you do a giant training run. But it's also quite important to actually see what works for you. So come race day, you're able to do that. Whereas a lot of athletes get to race day and then go crazy on gels, yet they don't actually know how they will sit or, and necessarily go for them. So real food's awesome. And it's just a case of like using your training to figure out what, how much
Yeah.
works for you, what you need and when.
Yeah, I'd say a little tip financially, I'd say try best to train as much as you can with race day fuel, and then whatever you can't afford, just top that up with like snakes or like gummy, whatever you like to eat, like
Yeah,
whatever
100%.
sugary food you like, gummy bears or whatever. That can
Yeah.
be the economic filler, I guess. And then on race day, switch back to that pure sort of like race product. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What works for you. Yep. 100%. I would agree with that too.
So yeah, I'll quickly bring up the what we have at
The
the
me
stations. Yeah.
the, the
Uh
menu.
yeah, my screen, the menu. Yeah, the menu. Um
I will just say that the amount of hydration, like the amount of carbs in our sports drink is 5%. So it's
mm,
at the low end, but that's because the main design of that product's to hydrate as fast as you can. And
yeah.
as a bonus, you'll get some energy out of it. But it's some fuels are actually like really carb heavy, but that's not what the hydration is. So that's why
Yeah, what
it's
we
not
have at the
designed.
aid stations is more of a hydration, and you
Yeah.
add fuel. Well, you get a bit
Yeah.
of fuel, but you add fuel on top of that. That's why we've got both the gels, and so you'll see here we've got
Yeah.
gels and that electrolyte
Yeah.
hydration at our aid station. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So all of our
in a
gels,
perfect
the
world,
gels,
you'd be able to drink that and have gels, and then a little bit of real food on top, and then that's
yeah.
would be a great race plan essentially.
Yeah, and the gels have 25 grams of carbs.
Mm.
What you'll see, you've got caffeine options. They'll have a green line on them, and they have 30 milligrams of caffeine each, which
Mm.
is equivalent to a third of a single shot of coffee. So not a giant amount, but enough that you can chip away using them.
Mm.
Yeah, you've got such an amazing spread here, which I think is really important because when people get to race day, different things play out, different situations pop up. And honestly, you can train on a gel your whole training and love it. And then you get to race day and it makes you want to vomit. Like it's so awesome that you've got lots of different options. The Snickers, the Mars, they'll all have a little bit of protein as well, which is important. The longer you go, the more protein your muscles need. So
Yeah, I'd say it almost works out like you want to stick to the top of this table in an ideal world, but in a practical world, you probably move further and further down the list.
yeah,
And so that's why at the end of the 100K, we've got a lot of that sort of like, you've got your cheese toasties and your peanut butter, and you might just want a peanut
yeah,
butter sandwich or a cup of soup, which technically doesn't have a lot of nutrients other than the salt in it, but it can still reset your palate and save your race. I think down the bottom of the list is a good option to almost assume you're gonna eat at the end of 100K. And be ready for that. And that can almost be a bit of a treat, like a cheese toasty or something.
oh
But
yeah,
most people will try and stick closer to the top of the table for as long as they can. But yeah, we offer that wide range of like real food options so that, because you never really know what you're going to need at 50K or 30K into the marathon if it all kind of starts falling to pieces. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. So I think you need to have that flexibility. I mean, in the perfect world, you go into a race like this and you only stick to what you've had during training and you don't deviate from that. But having the flexibility to be able to try these other things and have them there is really valuable. I would also say like take your time during the aid stations. Obviously, it's such a long race. I'm sure people do stop and walk or stop to actually consume the food, but it's not a negative thing to give your body a reset for the posture, for everything, and to actually relax while you're getting the fuel down. And it'll sit so much better rather than staying at that high intensity if you are trying to eat the real food.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a key point. But really, any of the races, 20K included, like Baker's Gully is a good spot after the first big climb, first big downhill, to just sit around, kind of see what food is interesting to you, grab a couple brownies or whatever if that's what you're feeling, and then keep on going. Yeah,
that's a good point actually. Like terrain, use the terrain. Like if it's going to be super hilly for a while, then gels might be a better option for digestion, and use the real food maybe in a more a downhill or a
so you would recommend in a more runnable section to try. That's when you try and eat more real foods. And
I think it comes down to intensity, right? And I think uphill it's generally higher intensity just naturally, isn't it? So it's harder for your body to take on sometimes. So
sure. Yeah, I think that covers a lot of it. One little tip I'll put in there is just that palate reset. Is that I don't think people consider that very often, but a lot of things, I think a lot of the time people think about just how many carbs something has in it or protein or whatever. But things like tea and Milo, especially tea, even if you just have a straight black tea, for example, I've used that a lot in races, and it almost just like strips your mouth of that sugary flavor and kind of gives you that comforting feeling, and then resets your stomach somehow. So have a look around, and I think whatever you're interested in and whatever you feel like at the time is probably the right thing for you in the race, essentially.
100%. And that tea will help hydrate like all the fluids.
Yeah, it's all good at the end of the day. And the coffee as well. I think caffeine, well, you did mention it earlier, but
one thing I will say about caffeine as well is it is actually relatively slow to absorb. So obviously it's a long day out, so people will be taking caffeine the whole way, but a lot of athletes take it towards the end of their event, whereas it can take up to an hour or even a little bit longer to be peak concentration in your blood. So don't be afraid to get on it a little bit earlier than you might anticipate.
Yeah, definitely. If it's a less than 10-hour run, which most people will be doing less than 10 hours, you're probably not going to overdo the caffeine in that time. I'd say almost more is better in a race where you're not worrying too much about sleeping that night or anything. But it's more when you get into those ultra 20K plus timings, you really have to think about how you ration your caffeine throughout.
Yeah.
That's when I would recommend waiting until you're actually tired and you need that kick. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And a lot of athletes you can get more impact out of caffeine if you cut it out pre-race, which I wouldn't recommend doing on a whim, but if it's something you could play around with in training, is like going off caffeine for a while and then introducing it for an event. You can get quite I guess you get the hit a little bit stronger.
Yeah, I've never done that. I can't imagine. I can't imagine being sad for the week before a race.
Yeah, easier said than done. Yeah.
I don't think it's worth the payoff. But if you're really, really serious about your running and you want to crush your race and crush your goals, then that's probably a good idea, to be honest. Yeah. I'll just stop sharing now. So I think that's most of what we have to talk about for the races. I think it's those main things. It's that fluid intake, electrolyte, and carbohydrate are the main things. You mentioned protein is really good. What kind of distances or time frames is the protein really coming into effect? Is that only for the 100K, do you think, or?
Anything over 2 hours, your body will start using a higher proportion of protein. So you need some in your nutrition plan, ideally.
Yeah, and this might be a big question, but would you ever? I don't know if I've ever seen it, but would anybody ever actually have a protein shake like at an aid station, or is that just fully?
They could. They
Yeah.
actually could. Like maybe a shot of it. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe want
Smaller amount.
stomach a whole. Yeah, yeah,
A
yeah.
whole scoop,
Maybe,
like a
but
half
yeah,
scoop or something. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Something to think about. Cool. Might be
Yeah,
packed.
definitely. And what I will say is, like if you can keep on top of your nutrition early on, normally when it's early on in a race, people feel better and they forget about it. It's not until they like start fatiguing, but by then it's too late. So if you can just keep on your nutrition from 15 minutes in, start fueling like straight away and spread it out as evenly as you can over each hour, it's going to pay off and you're going to get more out of your event than,
Yeah, definitely. I recommend that for sure. Yeah. And if you find yourself, sometimes you find yourself feeling really down in a race or really sad, and I often think that can actually just be like you haven't eaten enough. If you sit down at the next aid station, have a toasty and drink some coffee or whatever, and try and replenish, you'll generally feel a lot better. So that's another little tip for sure.
Have a Snickers bar.
Get your Snickers bars in. That's right. Nah, thank you very much. I think that pretty much covers it. We'll upload this one to YouTube and then onto Facebook, and people can start planning out their pre-race plans.
Awesome. Cool. Lovely to meet you. And good luck to everyone.
Yeah, lovely to meet you. See you at one of our events soon, hopefully.
Yeah, I'd love to get over. I don't know about running, like, I don't know, are there like snakes and stuff? How does that work? I'm just like,
there's no snakes in Australia anymore, so it's good.
Right.
It's good.
And no spiders. No spiders.
There's plenty.
All right. Good.
Nice meeting you.
Nice chatting. Talk soon. See ya. Bye.
See ya.